This feels like summer, boy, you make me feel so alive.
Hey beauty, so today I'm going to be showing you guys how to do an acrylic toe overlay. I first start off by putting the cuticle remover on to all of my clients' cuticles just to soften them, which makes it easier for me to push back the cuticle and get all that dead skin off of the nail plate. I'm going to start pushing her cuticles back, and it may look like I'm doing it roughly, but I promise I'm not. I try to keep my cuticle pusher down on the nail plate, and I try not to lift it up too much because the more you lift it up, the more it'll dig into their nail, and you don't want that. So I try to go gently around the cuticle area with the cuticle pusher as flat to the nail as I can possibly get, and I just go back and forth, and I try to make sure I get all that dead skin up off of the nail. I'm now going to start to go in with my e-file and kind of just use a couple of my cuticle bits and my sanding band just to get all of the dead skin off, just to kind of like make sure I've got it. I typically go all the way around the cuticle area, lightly bouncing the drill bit because you don't want to hold it onto their nail so that you cause what's called a ring of fire, which is essentially a burning sensation. So I like to gently bounce my cuticle bits as I'm going around, just so I'm not holding it in one place too long, and I'm using very light pressure. Now I'm going to go in with my small barrel bit, again going all the way around that cuticle, lightly bouncing that cuticle bit. And to me, this is a holy grail bit, okay? You should always be trying to use your small barrel bit when you're prepping your cuticles, because to me, this lifts the cuticles up so well, and it literally like goes hand in hand with me cutting her cuticles. Lastly, I'm going to go in with my medium grit sanding band, and I'm just going to go around her cuticles and then straight up the nail, just so I can remove any dust, debris, or any oil off of the nail. If you don't use any other cuticle bit, I definitely would not skip using your sanding band. I personally like to use cuticle bits, but you can really get the job done with just a sanding band if you know your way around the nail with it. And some techs I know do use just their sanding band, and this, in my opinion, would be the most important because this is what's going to lift your shine up off your nail so that you get a better retention. So if you don't have any money to get any other bit, I definitely would recommend you starting with the sanding band because you cannot go wrong with these. This is just me cleaning off my client's feet, making sure I get most of that dust off the nail before I go in and spray my Young Nail Swipe so that I can prepare to start putting the primer and dehydrator and then do my application. Here you see I'm actually going to spray each toe individually just because I feel like that does a better job than trying to spray the entire foot, because sometimes you can miss some spots. So for me, I like to spread my client's feet apart, and then I'm going to put a paper towel and my dapping dish in between my client's feet. Just visually for me, it better helps me see the set that I'm actually going to do once I start applying the acrylic, and then I can go back and forth and measure, just because, I don't know, I'm a perfectionist. Today I'm actually going to do a milky white set with Valentino's Soft Touch Acrylic. And if you're a nail tech, babe, you know the girlies love the soft white. So here you're going to see me almost start applying the acrylic without prepping our nails. And it is okay. We all make mistakes. I just wipe the acrylic off, and now I'm going back in with my Young Nail Swipe to dehydrate her nails. And then I'm going to go in and do 2 coats of my No Lift Nails primer, just so I can make sure that acrylic really adheres to that nail. Okay, so now I'm going to start applying the acrylic, and you really want to make sure you know your liquid to powder ratio once you start doing acrylic toes, because that will make all the difference in how long it actually takes you to do a set of acrylic toes. I usually aim for 2 beads on the big toe. If you are not experienced, you do not have to worry about trying to aim for 2 beads. It is about getting a flawless application, not how many beads you use. But for me personally, I start and I try to do a medium bead, and I'm going to go at that free edge, and you can see me, I'm trying to shape out the nail, and you see my acrylic isn't running all over the place. It isn't dripping. It isn't hard to move because I got my liquid to powder ratio down. And so now I'm just shaping it so I can get that really sharp square shape. And then I'm going to go back in and I'm going to put my bead a little closer to the cuticle, but we don't want to sit it right on top of the cuticle. Okay, so here I kind of want to mention 2 things. One, you see how the acrylic kind of curves so it's not touching her skin. You want to always make sure you don't have any like acrylic up underneath where her actual nail is, because that will be clunky and it'll affect how your shape looks. So now you also want to go, and you see how I kind of put the bead on top of where that last bead ended? That's kind of what you want to do. You want to put it on top of where the last bead started, and then you want to push it up and drag down. You don't want to sit your bead right at the cuticle area, because then it's going to cause flooding. And you don't want to cause flooding, because that is just a major headache. And so here I'm just blending that into that first bead, and I'm going around my cuticle area to make sure I don't have any flooding or any areas where there could be potential lifting. If liquid gets up under it, you want to make sure everything is flush to that nail, just so you don't have any type of lifting issues, any type of greenie once they take those nails off, anything. You want to make sure everything is flush, flat, and neat. Okay, so here's what I was talking about. I had a bristle from my brush stuck in the acrylic. So here I'm going to dig it out. And then I know I'm going to have to put another bead on top of that. And the perfectionist in me says 2 beads per toe. But I'm honestly going to end up doing maybe like 3 or 4, just because her nail bed does curve just a little bit. So I know in order for it to be that seamless look once I'm done, I'm going to have to use more, and that is okay. Never feel like you failed because you're using more beads. Use as many as you need to make that application flawless. So here I'm going to be starting on the small toes, and for small toes, I usually use one bead, and you want to kind of make this a little drier than you did that bead for the big toe, just because I'm only going in with one. I sit the bead at the middle of the nail, and then I push up towards the cuticle to try and get my cuticle application flawless, and then I'm just going to drag down and cover that entire nail with that acrylic, and then I'm going to start shaping it to her nail, and I'm going to push at the free edge just a little bit, just to square off that nail and make sure it is a sharp square toe. But you want to make sure you're using small to possibly medium beads depending on the toe, just because you don't want so much acrylic that you kind of have to take some off. I like to try to use the entire bead that I put. I try to make sure I get the perfect size bead. So you see I'm just squaring off the end, and I'm not taking any off. That's all going to stay on that nail, and it was the perfect size. So you definitely want to play around with your liquid to powder ratio. You also want to play around with your bead size, because that is very important. If you use too much, you're going to be getting monomer and acrylic everywhere and all over their skin. If you use too little, you're going to be doing more than one bead, which is okay. But the more beads you use, the more time you're going to take. So with toes, I try to stay somewhere near my goal bead range. But again, don't freak out if you don't. If you're just learning, you don't have to try to be perfect. You are just learning. That is totally fine. I do want to point out that you guys see how my beads are not like drying up on me and becoming hard. When I say drier, I don't mean dry, like there's no monomer. You still need a workable bead, but you want to try to get it a little drier than you would that first toe bead, because you want it to be controllable, but you want to control that bead. Do not let that bead control you, because then the entire set will become a headache. I mean, literally, look at how square those toes are. And I didn't use tips. I didn't use forms. I just used monomer and acrylic. And they look great already. Like, I'm going to move on to the last two toes. And you really want to pay attention for the last two toes, because those are usually like sometimes drastically smaller. So for the last two, I don't even go to like small to medium beads. I aim for like small beads, because especially your pinky toe, it can get hectic, because there are a lot of clients who don't actually have a pinky toe. So you want to make sure you're using smaller beads and very, very little liquid. Like, you really want to make sure you're not getting a really more wet bead. You want kind of like a slightly moist bead so that you can work with it, but it's not working your nerves, okay? Y'all gonna see me struggle a little bit, because I was really trying to hold on to that last little bit of monomer when I really should have just put some more monomer in that dapping dish. Like, it was never that serious, babe. But I was being thirsty and trying to hold on to something that wasn't there. But for the pinky toes, you want to try and, I would say, maybe make them a little thinner, just because a lot of, well, my clients have smaller pinky toes, so you don't want to really like overweigh that nail bed. So I try to make them a little thinner, and I file all my acrylic toes down to the skin, just because I don't want there to be any length on that free edge that could get caught, rip socks, hit tennis shoes, anything of that nature. And then literally you're done. Your application is now finished, and those toes look great already, and I haven't even started to file or buff them. This is kind of something I didn't see many people talk about when I was a beginner, and so I'm going to tell you, be organized. You see, I'm moving my stuff out of the way before I start to file and buff, because as a beginner, it will give you a headache if you are continuously piling stuff onto your desk, in your face, in your workspace, and it really does make you very anxious. So please be clean while you're doing nails. Now I'm going to go in with my 80 grit file, and you always want to remember to keep that file flush to the nail. I am going to try to show you guys here. First, you want to go in and tap the nail, and it should make a clicking sound. That's how you know it's dry. And I usually start off by trying to push that skin out of the way so I can make sure it's not attached to the acrylic once I start to file. And then I'm going to go in and file my sides first just so I can get them crisp. And then I'm going to go and file the free edge. And again, you want to make sure you're holding that file flush to that nail. You don't want to bend it, curve it, or have any gaps between any part of that file and that nail, because then your application is gonna, your shape is gonna start to look a little wonky. So you see how I have that file right on the nail as I'm filing. You want to make sure your file is flush to that nail. No gaps, no leaning, nothing. You want to make sure it is on that nail as you are going up and down. And you want to make sure you're taking breaks in between. Don't just file super fast, super hard. You want to get in there, file for a bit, stop, take a look at what you're doing, and then keep going. When I'm filing the top of the nail, I've seen a lot of techs say they only go one direction. Me personally, I like to go back and forth. I like to hold my client's skin back a little bit just because 80 grit files are sharp and you can cut your clients if you don't use them correctly. But I like to go on the top of the nail, file off a little bit so that that nail can be flat, and then I go ahead and refile the sides. And after that, I'll move on to the next toe, and then we're just going to keep repeating that process. We're going to go for the sidewalls, free edge, then the top. I don't want this video to be 30 minutes long, so I'm going to do this toe, and then I'm actually going to speed it up. So now I'm going to go in with my e-file again, and this time I'm actually going to go up to 9 RPMs. I'm going to start by going around the cuticle just so I can make sure I am sealing that cuticle, and then I'm going to go around the entire nail just so I can make sure that everything is flat and I have no bumps, no lumps, no anything of that nature. Now, I know some people swear by their 5-in-1 bits, and sometimes I do use that, but for this particular client, I honestly just always feel like my application is it. So I typically use just my sanding band on her once I'm finished with her application and all of that, and her toes stay on for anywhere from like 4 weeks to 3 months. Like on her other foot, she still has 2 toes that absolutely just would not come off. So really, it's all up to your application. And if you really have that down packed, you can use a sanding band. Now, I'm not going to say you should, because use what you want to, but for me, this is what works. Here are her feet before I wipe, polish, and dry them. And if you guys like the video, subscribe, like, and share with a friend. And here's how they looked at the end. Thank you for watching.
Just be my lover. Boy, you